lesson, we're going to learn how to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of this course, we use all three technologies to build a full website. HTML creates the content of a website, like the buttons and the text. CSS changes the appearance of the website. And JavaScript makes the website interactive. The first thing we're going to do is review the basics of HTML and CSS that we will need for the rest of this course. Now, in order to write HTML and CSS code, we'll need to another piece of software called a code editor. A code editor helps us write and organize our code. The most popular code editor for web development is called VS Code, or Visual Studio Code. To install VS Code, you can go to google.com in your browser, search for VS Code, click the result, and follow the instructions to download and install. Once we've installed VS Code, we're ready to review the basics of HTML and CSS. We'll start with HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And just like JavaScript, HTML is also giving instructions to a computer. Now, unlike JavaScript, we can't use the console to write and run HTML code. Instead, we write HTML code inside a file using our code editor. Let's do that right now. We'll start by going to our desktop. So I'm going to close my browser to go to my desktop. And then we're going to create a new folder. So we can right-click, New Folder. This folder is going to contain all the code that we write in this course. Let's name this folder JavaScript-course. Next, we're going to open this folder in our code editor. So let's open VS Code. And then we'll click File, Open Folder, and find the folder that we just created. For me, it's on the desktop, and it's this folder right here. So we're going to select the folder, and then click Select Folder. Now we can close this startup message, and we're going to create an HTML file. We're going to click this icon to create a new file, and we're going to with dot rather than code greater than the computer to create a button. And inside the button, we're going to have the text hello. Now let's save this file by clicking File, Save, or by typing Control S on Windows or Command S on Mac. Now to run this HTML code, we're going to open this file in our browser. Let's go back to our desktop. We're going to open the folder that we created, find the HTML file, select it, and then right-click, Open with Google Chrome. As you can see, we have a website, and we created a button with the text hello inside. And if we look back at our code, that's exactly what we told the computer to do. So just like JavaScript, HTML is also giving instructions to a computer. Let's review some more HTML code. First, I'm just going to rearrange my windows here so that it's easy to see the website side by side. Next, we're going to click the end of the first line and press Enter to create a new line. And we're going to type the code less than P greater than. and we also need to type less than /p greater than. So this code creates a paragraph. And inside the paragraph, we're going to put some text. For example, paragraph of text. Now let's save our file by typing Control S on Windows or Command S on Mac. And to update our website to the new code, we're going to go to our website and click refresh, or type Control R on Windows or Command R on Mac. And now you can see that the computer created a paragraph of text, just like we told it to do. And that's the basics of HTML. The computer reads our code and then follows our instructions one by one. First, it creates a button, and then it creates a paragraph of text. Now let's review the syntax rules for HTML. Each of these things that we're displaying on a web page, these are called HTML elements. So a button is a type of HTML element, and a paragraph is another type of HTML element. To create an element, we start with a less than symbol, and then the element name, like a button, and then the greater than symbol. So this whole thing is called an HTML tag. This tells a computer to create a button element. Every HTML tag needs a matching tag. The matching tag follows the same syntax, except it has a slash in front of the element name. So this is called the opening tag, and this is called the closing tag. You can think of the opening tag as the start of the button, and the closing tag as the end of the button. And in between, we have the contents inside the button. In this case, it's the text hello. In addition to text, we can also have elements inside an element. For example, we can go to our paragraph element, and we can add a button inside. So less than, button, greater than, and we also need less than /button greater than. And then inside the button, we'll also have the text hello. If we save this file and refresh the page, now our paragraph element has a button element inside. By the way, this is called nesting, when we have an element inside another element. The last syntax rule we have to review is that in HTML, if we have multiple spaces, for example, if we go here and type multiple spaces are combined into one space on the web page. So if we save this code and refresh, you'll notice that all of the spaces that we added only show up as one space on the web page. In addition, in HTML, new lines also count as spaces. So if we go back to our code and we type here and press enter to create a new line, and then save and refresh, notice that the new line doesn't appear on the web page. And that's because this new line here is the same as spaces in HTML. So all of these get combined into one space on the web page. At first, this might seem a little weird, but this feature gives us a lot of flexibility when organizing our HTML code. For example, we can go into our code and add a new line here to separate these two elements easier to line. For example, we're going to type here, enter, move, and refresh here, like the home syntax, cascading style sheets. And CSS changes the appearance of our website. Says type here, we're going to create then CSS curly bracket, the appear bracket, we and changes the appearance red. Says code. I'm going to type here and press enter, semicolon. And then how to view the syntax rules for CSS. This part of the CSS code is called the CSS selector. It tells the computer which elements we want to change. In other words, it selects which elements to change. Inside the curly brackets, we have some CSS styles. This tells the computer how to change the appearance. For each style, the left side is called the CSS property. This tells the computer what we're changing. The right side is called the CSS value. This tells the computer what we're changing the property to. For example, this style changes the background color to red. We use a colon to separate the property and the value, and a semicolon at the end to tell the computer that this is the end of a style. So that's the basic syntax of CSS. We tell the computer which elements we want to change, and then how to change the appearance of these elements. The next thing we're going to review is HTML attributes. Right now, this CSS selector changes the appearance of all buttons on the page. However, what if we only want to change the appearance of this one button, and we want to style the other button differently? How do we do that? We're going to review a feature of HTML called attributes. Attributes change the behavior of an element. For example, we're going to go to the opening tag of the first button, and then here we're going to add an HTML attribute by typing space title equals double quotes. And then in between the double quotes, we're going to type tooltip. So this is an HTML attribute, and this attribute adds a tooltip to this button. If you're wondering what a tooltip is, if we hover over some code in our code editor, it'll show us this sort of pop-up with more information. This is called a tooltip when we hover over something and this shows up. So if we save our file and refresh the web page, and now we hover over our button, we can see that the HTML attribute added a tooltip to our button. And then inside the double quotes is the text inside the tooltip. For example, we can actually change this to good job. And if we save and refresh and hover over our button, the text between the double quotes is what shows up in our tooltip. So that's an example of an HTML attribute. Now let's review the syntax rules for attributes. We always put attributes on the opening tag, and we add a space between the element name and the attribute to separate them. On the left side is the attribute name. This tells the computer what we're changing about this element. On the right side is the attribute value. This tells the computer what we're changing this attribute to. For example, here we're changing the tooltip of this element to good job. We separate the name and value with an equal sign and make sure there are no spaces around the equal sign. And we surround the value with double quotes. Now let's go back to the original problem. How do we style these buttons differently? We can do this using a very important attribute called the class. We're going to type class. We labeled this button. We can select it in CSS. We're going to look for this element. Now these styles get applied to both buttons. And we're going to and by specific the HTML structure. Let's go back to our website. We're going to find a blank area and then right click and then click inspect. So we already learned about the console tab. Here we can write and run JavaScript code. Now we're going to go to the Elements tab, which is for HTML and CSS. So as HTML less than this, the browser might less than HTML head right general select this. Okay, so what are the benefits of following this structure? one benefit is that there are other elements that we can use. Press enter. So the title, if we map bar, so let's open that for look for a set, and we're already in, and then in the file change our code to green. If we save, Live Server will automatically refresh the web page, so we don't have to do that back and forth. Sense the video mentioned in each lesson. Script to our website. Notice that many of these lines have spaces at the front. Inside the brackets, because it has an extra with the code indent, we can type at the beginning of the line Shift Tab. VS Code, CSS, and JavaScript, we usually use 2 spaces per indent. So we're going to update this setting. Let's go to our settings by clicking this icon in the bottom left, and then click Settings. And at the top, we're going to search for tab. And we're going to change the tab size from 4 to 2. Now let's close the settings. And we're also going to change the indents for this file. We're going to go down here and click Select Indent. And we're going to choose Indent using spaces, and then click 2. And now if we type at the start of a line and press Tab, it will only add 2 spaces per indent. So let's reformat our code to use 2 spaces per indent instead of 4. First, we're going to remove all the indents in our code. A shortcut for this is to select all of these lines and press Shift Tab to remove 1 indent for each line. So we're going to keep pressing Shift Tab until we remove all the indents. Next, we're going to add the indents back using a similar shortcut. We're going to select the head element and press Tab to add 1 indent for each line, and then select everything inside the head and press Tab to add another indent, and then select everything inside style and press Tab, and then inside each of these brackets, we're going to select the lines, press Tab, and then here, press Tab. We'll do the same thing for the body element. We'll select all these lines and press go, and we're going to look for editor word wrap, and we're going to turn to our code next line instead of us having to horizontally scroll and website. Well, there's actually another way to run JavaScript, which is inside an HTML file. Let's learn how to do that. So we learned that HTML has a special element that runs CSS code called the style element. Well, HTML has another special element that runs JavaScript code, and this element is called the script element. So inside our body, at the bottom of the body, we're going to add less than script greater than and the closing tag less than / script greater than. And inside the script element, we can put some JavaScript code. We're going to add the code alert, open bracket, quote, hello, quote, close bracket, and semicolon. If we save, Live Server will refresh the page, and now you'll notice that the computer now runs our JavaScript code, just like it did in the console. It creates a pop-up with the text hello inside. And we usually put the script element at the bottom of the body because we want the web page to be created first, and then we use JavaScript to make it interactive. For the rest of this course, we're going to run our JavaScript code using an HTML file. The console that we used in the previous lessons is more of a way to try out JavaScript code. We wouldn't use the console for a real website. In addition to the script element, we have another way to run JavaScript code inside HTML, and that's by using an attribute. Let's go back to our first button, and here we're going to add another attribute. So let's type space, and this time we're going to add the onClick attribute equals double quotes.
Yes.
So this attribute will run JavaScript code whenever we click this button. That's what onClick means. Between the double quotes, we can write some JavaScript. For example, let's press enter, enter, and then here we're going to type alert, open bracket, quote, good job, quote, close bracket, and semicolon. Now, if we save, live server will refresh the page and run this line of JavaScript code.
Now
Let's press
this
OK.
This
And now if we click this button, it will run this line of JavaScript code and create a pop-up with the text, good job inside. So those are two places where we can run JavaScript code, the script element and the onClick attribute. The code in the script element runs first when the page is loaded. The code in the onClick attribute runs after when we click the button on the page. And that's how we use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together.
Some little project with HTML and CSS before going to JavaScript. And like, I'm always doing live, so I'm always streaming. So I did all my project was being streamed on my channel. Yes, this is it. This is the first one, but it's not too perfect because I don't wanted to stress about everything. I just try to create something similar like that. Yes. This one and this one. I just did the read project before going. I did also this one. This project was for a fixed dimension, so it was something like that. Oh, that's yes, that they said create a GitHub account and just be pushing your code there. So when I have a project, I'll just create and just push it there. For the moment, that is the beginning, so I'm just learning and creating some stuff.
On a website. Notice that everything starts from HTML. HTML first creates the website, and then inside the HTML, we can run
Like seriously, Google Drive. Like, what's the purpose?
CSS code to change the appearance, and we can run JavaScript code to make the website interactive. Now let's learn some new features of JavaScript that we haven't seen yet in this course. The next feature we're going to learn is called comments. Comments are pieces of code that the computer ignores. So let's create our first comment. We're going to go down to the script element here and type //. So this is a comment. Anything after the double slash will be ignored by the computer. So we can type anything we want, like this is a comment. If we save, it ignores this line and creates the pop-up in the next line. Now let's close this pop-up and learn why we use comments. Comments are useful for providing more information for people reading our code. For example, we can create a comment above this code, like this code creates a pop-up. This comment helps others and ourselves understand what this code does.
On this journey, if you are not well informed, you're going to too much waste your time. That's true because sure I had my GitHub account since, but I was never using it. I'd never knew really the purpose of GitHub before I started learning.
So that's one way we use comments. Another way we use comments
But
is
hope
if we
the
don't want to run some code anymore, but we also don't want to delete it.
that's cool.
For example, this code
So
creates
that
a
when you
pop-up
see that they
every
will
time we refresh
too
the
much
page. And this
wonder
can be
about
annoying.
why did they started
So I want to
pushing their
stop
code
running
on
this code,
Google Drive.
but I also don't want to delete it because you might want to review this code later. So what we can do here is to add a double slash in front of this line to turn this code into a comment. Now, if we save, the computer will ignore this line of code and not create the pop-up. This is called commenting out the code. It's useful if we don't want to run some code anymore, but we also don't want to delete it for informational purposes. So JavaScript has another syntax for writing
how far
comments,
are you on your journey
and that syntax is
of
slash
aspiring software
star
engineer?
and star slash. Here, anything between the stars is a comment. This is called a multi-line comment because between the stars, we can write a comment on multiple lines. For example, we can type multi, enter, line, enter, comment. On the other hand, double slash is known as a single line comment. Now, just like JavaScript, HTML and CSS
And
also have
use
comments,
like,
but they use a
the
different
main stack
syntax.
or use another stack
If we
for
scroll up to our
your
HTML,
project. Like
here we can type less than, exclamation, dash dash. And we also need dash dash greater than. So anything between these double dashes is a comment.
okay.
For example, this
We're very curious of to find out all your great projects. No, it's here. What am I even doing? I don't know if I can even find. Obstacle pilot find a procedure. Alright. This for sure is this one. I don't know if I selected it with the okay, that's great. Oh, you're from New York. You do everything web development, constant. Best Bible. Okay, let me see. Oh, your repository. Oh, that's great. Maybe like I just creating stuff like every day. Oh, that's cool. Time right there. Meaning you're learning everything because I'm seeing like buy games, even web, house game orchard. I was trying to create something like this bird on the web. Oh, 3 years, meaning that you have enough experience. Oh, that's a great work. I'm trying to also create like many projects,
This
but for the moment
is
I need
a
to learn more.
comment. In CSS, to create a comment, we can type /**//. So it's the same multi-line comment as JavaScript. Between the stars, we can add a comment. So this is a
Yes,
comment.
thanks.
If we
Like,
save our file,
I hope it's not
nothing
going to be
changes on our web page
difficult.
because comments are ignored by the computer. The last feature of JavaScript we're going to learn is called console.log. Let's go back to our code.
Oh, thanks for the follow.
And at the bottom, in the script element, we're going to type the code 2 plus 2. So we learned that this code in JavaScript does some math.
And
However,
also, what is
if we save this file,
like, what is the best way to learn JavaScript? Like, every people are saying JavaScript is very difficult, all of those stuff, but like, I don't know if there's a right way to learn it.
where is the result of this math? So we might think that the result will show up in the console, but if we right-click, click Inspect, and then click the console, you'll notice that the result doesn't show up here either. And that's because before we were running 2 plus 2 inside the console. So the result shows up in the console. But now we're not running this code in the console anymore. We're running this code on the web page. So how do we see this result? The solution is we're going to redirect this result back to the console. To do that, we're going to use this piece of code. Console.log, open bracket, close bracket, and semicolon. Console.log will display whatever's between the brackets back in the console. So if we move this code between the brackets, so we select this and then right-click, cut, and then between the brackets, right-click, paste, and save, the result of this code is displayed back in the console. And console.log works for any code that we learned so far. For example, we can use strings. So let's create a new line and type console.log, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon, and then between the brackets, let's type some strings. Quote, some quote, plus, quote, text, quote, and save this file. Again, it will display the result of whatever's between the brackets back in the console. So that's how we see the result of JavaScript code that is running in a file. We use console.log. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we reviewed the basics of HTML and CSS. We set up our code editor, VS Code. We learned how to load JavaScript inside an HTML file using the script element and the onClick attribute. We learned how to create comments, and we learned how to use console.log. Thanks for watching this course so far. If you want to support this channel, you can check out the premium version of my courses just like this one, where you can get a certificate of completion and a better learning platform. If you're interested in extra videos from me, more in-depth videos, and behind-the-scenes content, you can check out these links here. You can also support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing this video with others. Thanks again, and let's continue with the course. Here are some exercises you can try on your own to practice what we learned in this lesson. To practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn the next feature of JavaScript called variables. And we're going to use variables to build a simple version of the cart quantity feature of the final project. First, let's create a new HTML file just for learning variables. We're going to go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files, and then click this icon to create a new file. And we're going to name this file 05-variables.html and press enter. So the 05 just means that this file is for lesson 5. Let's also add the lesson number to website.html. We'll select this file and then right-click, rename, and then at the front, we'll add 04- and press enter. Next, we're going to copy all the code in website.html to variables.html. So let's click in this file, and we're going to select all of this code by typing Control-A on Windows or Command-A on Mac. And then we're going to right-click, copy, and then inside variables.html, right-click, and paste. Let's click this icon to hide our files for now, and we'll prepare this file for this lesson. So let's scroll up to the top, and first we're going to change the title to variables. Next, we're going to delete all the CSS because we're going to start over. And we're going to delete all the HTML except for the script element. And let's delete all the JavaScript from the previous lesson. And finally, let's save. And we'll open this file in our browser by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. And now we can close the previous tab and the previous code for now. Now we're ready to learn variables. First of all, what is a variable? A variable is like a container. We can save a value, like a number or a string, inside a variable, and then use it later. Let's do an example and create our first variable. Inside the script element, we're going to type the code let and space. The word let creates a new variable. And now we're going to choose a name for our new variable. Let's name this variable1. So this creates a variable or a container named variable1. And now we can save a value inside this variable. To do that, we're going to type space equals space, and then a value, like a number or a string. So let's save the number 3 inside, and we'll type a semicolon at the end. So here, we used the let to create a new variable. We named this variable variable1, and we saved the value 3 inside this variable. Now that we saved this value, we can use it later. For example, let's type a new line and type the code console.log. open bracket, close bracket, and semicolon. Remember from the previous lesson that this code displays whatever's inside the brackets in the console. So far, we put a value inside, like the number 2. If we save, and then go to our website and open the console, so right-click, inspect, and then click the console, we can see that the number 2 was displayed in the console. So now let's try replacing this value with the variable that we created above. So instead of 2, we're going to console.log variable1. If we save, notice that it now displays 3. So it's displaying whatever value is saved inside the variable. As you can see, we can save a value inside a variable and then use that variable later on. Let's do another example. We're going to create another variable. So we're going to create some new lines and we'll type let. And this time, let's name this variable calculation. And we're going to type space equals space to save a value inside this new variable. And this time, instead of just a number, we're going to save a calculation. 2 plus 2 and semicolon. So this will calculate 2 plus 2 and then save the result, which is 4, into the variable. If we console.log open bracket calculation and semicolon and save, it will show us that the value 4 is saved inside calculation. Now let's try this code. We're going to type a new line and then console.log open bracket and calculation again and plus 2 and semicolon. So here we're using a variable inside a calculation. What this does is that it takes whatever value is saved inside the variable. Right now it is 4, and then substitutes that value into the calculation. So this will be 4 plus 2, which equals 6. If we save, we can see that in the console, it displayed 6. So we can use a variable wherever we use a value. And JavaScript will substitute whatever is inside the variable into the code. Let's do another example. We're going to type some new lines and create a new variable again using let, and we're going to name this variable result. And we're going to make it equal to calculation plus 2 and semicolon. So this does the same thing as the code before. It will take whatever value is inside calculation, which is 4, and substitute it into this code. So we get 4 plus 2 equals 6. But this time, we have an extra step. We're going to save this result, which is 6, into another variable. So if we console.log result and save, we can see that 6 was saved into the result variable. Again, we can use a variable wherever we use a value. Now, in addition to numbers, we can save any type of value in a variable, including strings. For example, let's create a new variable using let, and let's name this message. And we're going to save inside this variable a string this time. So quote, hello, quote, and semicolon. Again, we're going to console.log this variable. So console.log and message, and a semicolon at the end. If we save, it will show us that the string hello is saved inside this variable. Okay, now that we learned how variables work, let's learn the syntax rules for variables. The word let creates a new variable, and then we give the variable a name. So we can name variables almost anything we want, except for a few restrictions. Number one, we can't use special words like let as a variable name. That's because let already has a special meaning in JavaScript. It creates a variable. So let is a reserved word. However, we can use let1 or let2 as variable names. We just can't use let. Number two, we can't start a variable name with a number. If we start with a number, JavaScript will think this is a number instead of a variable name. However, we can use numbers in the middle or the end. Lastly, we can't use most special characters, like these or a space in a variable name. However, there are two special characters we can use, $ and underscore. So those are the rules for naming variables. And then to save something inside a variable, we just use the equal sign, and then the value we want to save. And that's it. After we create a variable, we can start using it in the rest of our code. Now there's one last part of the syntax that we haven't learned, which is the semicolon. We've seen semicolons in many places already. In JavaScript, a semicolon means this is the end of an instruction. It's similar to a period in English. In English, a period means this is the end of a sentence. So here, this semicolon tells JavaScript that this is the end of an instruction. And now after this, we can add another instruction, like console.log, open bracket, and then the string semicolon, and a semicolon at the end. If we save, it will run these two instructions one after another without any problems. So if we didn't have the semicolon here and we save, it wouldn't work because JavaScript thinks that this entire line is one instruction. So we need semicolons to separate different instructions in JavaScript. If we save, everything goes back to normal. So JavaScript is a little special because it has a feature called semicolon insertion. That means it will try to insert the last semicolon in a line of code automatically. For example, if we removed the last semicolon and save, this code will work without that semicolon. And that's because JavaScript inserts the last semicolon automatically. However, a lot of companies still prefer to use semicolons in their JavaScript code because semicolon insertion can sometimes put the semicolon in the wrong place. For this reason, we're also going to use semicolons in this course to help you get used to JavaScript code with semicolons. Next, we're going to learn how to change the value that is saved inside a variable. For example, here we save the number 3 inside variable 1. Now we're going to change the value saved inside variable 1. To do that, we're going to go to the bottom and create some new lines. And we're going to type the variable name again. So variable 1. And now to change the value saved inside, we're just going to type the equal sign and then a different value like 5 and semicolon. And now if we console.log this variable, console.log variable 1 and semicolon and save, it will show us that 5 is now saved inside variable 1. Notice also that if we scroll up to the top, the first console.log still displays the value 3. And that's because at this point in the code, variable 1 still contained 3. We didn't update the variable yet. So when we first saved a value inside this variable, this is called assigning a value to a variable. Then when we change the value inside this variable, this is called reassigning a value to a variable. Now let's learn the syntax rules for reassigning a value. Notice that we don't use the word let when reassigning. That's because let creates a new variable. So if we try to use let again, it would try to create a new variable named variable1. However, variable1 already exists, and we can't create two variables with the same name, so this would cause an error. Instead, to reassign a variable, we just type out the variable name and make it equal to something else. So that's the syntax for reassigning a variable. Now we're going to do one last example before working on the project. Let's go to the end of our code. We're going to type some new lines. And this time, we're going to reassign variable 1 again. So we can reassign a variable as many times as we want. So let's type variable 1 and then equals, and we're going to type variable 1 plus 1 and semicolon. So we learned earlier that we can use a variable inside a calculation, and it will substitute whatever value is inside the variable. Here, we're also using a variable inside the calculation, but we're using this variable itself. So it's essentially taking this variable, increasing it by 1, and then saving it back. If we console.log this variable, variable1, and save, variable1 now contains 6. So it took the previous value in variable1, which was 5, added 1, and then saved it back. So this is how we increase the value of a variable by a certain number. Okay, now that we know how to create and reassign variables, we're ready to work on a project. So I actually prepared a project that we can do for this lesson. And we can see this project by going to our browser, clicking at the top, and typing super simple.dev/projects/variables and press enter. So we're going to work on the cart quantity feature of the final project. So in the final project, we have a number in the top right corner that shows how many products are in our cart. When we click the Add to Cart button, this quantity will increase. So what you see here is a simple version of the cart quantity feature that we can create right now. Let's go over how it works. First, make sure you have the console open on this page. Now when we click the Show Quantity button, it will show us that there are 0 products in our cart. If we click the Add to Cart button, it will increase the quantity by 1 and display it in the console. If we click Add to Cart again, it will increase the quantity by 1 again. Now in the final project, we can also add more than one product at a time using this dropdown. For now, we're going to build a simpler version of that. We're going to use the +2 and +3 buttons to add multiple products. So when we click the +2 button, it will increase the quantity by 2 and display it in the console. And when we click the +3 button, it will increase the quantity by 3. And finally, when we click the Reset Cart button, it will reset the quantity back to 0 and display this message in the console. So now that we understand how this project works, let's build this step by step. First, let's create a new HTML file just for this project. We're going to go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files, and then click this icon to create a new file. Let's name this file 05-cart-quantity.html. variables.html and press enter. Next, let's open variables.html, and we're going to copy all the code here into our new file. Let's type Control A on Windows or Command A on Mac to select all this code, and then right click, copy, and then in our new file, right click and paste. Let's close this for now. And in the new file, we're going to change the title to cart quantity. And let's remove all of our JavaScript code, but keep the script element because we're going to write new JavaScript code. Now we're ready to begin. Let's start by creating these buttons. Let's go to the body element. I'm going to create a new line. And here, as we learned in the previous lesson, we can create a button using this HTML code. Less than, button, greater than, and the closing tag less than / button greater than. Inside this button, we're going to have the text show quantity. And let's save. Now let's open this file in Live Server by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. And we can see that we created the first button. Now let's create the other buttons here. Feel free to pause the video if you want to try it yourself. We're going to go back to our HTML and create another button. Inside this one, we're going to have the text add to cart. Let's create another button. This one is going to have the text +2, and we'll create another button. This one is going to be +3, and finally, we'll create the last button. And this one is reset cart. And now let's save. And if we go back to our tab, we've created all the buttons. Now let's make this web page interactive with JavaScript. First of all, we need somewhere to save the cart quantity. So as we learned in this lesson, variables are the perfect solution for this. Variables let us save a value. So let's go into the script element, and we're going to create a variable by typing let. And this variable is going to save the cart quantity. So let's just name it cart, capital Q, quantity. So the cart quantity will start out at 0. So we're going to type equals 0 and semicolon. Next, when we click the show quantity button, we want to display the quantity in the console. To do this, we learned a special HTML attribute in the previous lesson called the onClick attribute. So we're going to type in this opening tag here, space onClick equals and double quotes. So the onClick attribute runs some JavaScript when we click this button. And between the double quotes, we can write JavaScript code. So let's press enter, enter. And now when we click this button, we want to display the cart quantity in the console. So let's type console.log, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon. And then between the brackets, we're going to display a message. Now, if we go back to supersimple.dev and we click show quantity, we want to display this message in the console. So in our code, between the brackets, we're going to type the string quote cart quantity :0. Now let's save and go back to our tab to try it out. So we're going to open the console first by right-clicking and then click Inspect and then click the console. And now when we press the Show Quantity button, it should display that message in the console. Okay, so we just made our project interactive. However, we obviously don't want to display 0 every time. We want to display the value inside cart quantity. So we'll need to insert this value inside this string. Remember from the strings lesson, when we want to insert a value into a string, we're going to use a template string. So let's switch the single quotes to backticks to create a template string. And now instead of 0, we're going to insert a value using $, open curly bracket, and close curly bracket. And in between these brackets, we're going to insert this variable, cart capital Q quantity. Remember that JavaScript is case sensitive, so make sure you type the variable name exactly the same. Now let's save and click show quantity again. And now it displays the value inside cart quantity in the console. So notice that variables also work with string interpolation. Again, we can use a variable wherever we use a value, and it will just substitute whatever value is saved inside this variable into the code. Now let's make the rest of the buttons interactive. So when we click the Add to Cart button, we're going to add 1 to this cart quantity and display it in the console. So again, we're going to type here and type space on click equals double quotes, and between the double quotes, we're going to add JavaScript. Let's also add some new lines here to make our code easier to read. Okay, so in the onClick attribute, we're going to do 2 things. The first one is increase the cart quantity by 1. We can do that by reassigning the cart quantity variable. So we're going to type just the variable name, cart quantity, and we're going to make it equal to itself plus 1 and semicolon. Next, we're going to display the updated quantity in the console. So let's press enter, and we're going to display this message again. So we can actually just copy this code. So we'll select it and then right click and copy. And then here, right click and paste. Now if we save and click the Add to Cart button, we'll see that it increased the quantity by 1 and displayed the updated quantity in the console. Let's press it again to make sure it works. So it increases it by 1 again and then displays it in the console. So that's basically how the cart quantity feature works in the final project. First, we need a variable to save the quantity, and then when we click a button, we're going to update the quantity. So now, let's make the rest of these buttons interactive. Feel free to pause the video if you want. want to try it yourself. For the +2 button, we're going to add the onClick attribute again. OnClick equals double quotes. And inside, we're going to increase the cart quantity by 2. So cart quantity, and then we'll just make it equal to itself plus 2 and semicolon. And again, we're going to display the updated quantity in the console. So we can create a new line and just copy this code. So select it, right click, copy, and here, right click and paste. Let's save and click +2 a few times. And we can see that it adds 2 to the cart quantity and displays it in the console. For the +3 button, we'll do the same. Let's type an onClick attribute. Click equals double quotes. And here, we're going to increase the cart quantity by 3. So cart quantity equals itself plus 3 and semicolon. And we're going to display this in the console again. So we'll select this, right click, copy, and here, right click and paste. Let's save again and try it out to make sure it works. So +3, +3. And finally, let's do the reset cart button. So we'll add the onClick attribute again. OnClick equals double quotes. And inside the double quotes, we're going to do something a little different this time. Instead of increasing the cart quantity, we'll set it back to 0. To do this, we can just reassign the cart quantity variable. So cart quantity, and just make it equal to 0 and semicolon. Now, if we go back to supersimple.dev and try out this reset cart button, you'll notice that it displays 2 messages. The first message is cart was reset. So we're going to display that message in our code first. Console.log and the string cart was reset. And the second message is the same message as the other buttons. So we can just select this and then right click, copy, and then here, right click and paste. And now let's save and go back to our tab and give this a try. So the cart quantity starts at 0. When we press add to cart, increases by 1. This increases by 2. This increases by 3. And when we click reset cart, it'll display cart was reset and reset the cart quantity back to 0. And that's it. We just created a simple version of the cart quantity feature of our final project, using everything that we learned in this course so far. Now we're going to learn some shortcuts for reassigning variables. So if we look at this line of code, here, we're increasing the value of this variable by 2, and then saving it back. Well, there's actually a shortcut for this, and that shortcut is cart quantity plus equals 2 and semicolon. So this does the same thing as the line above, but it's just shorter. The plus means we're going to add 2 to cart quantity, and equals means we're going to save that result back to cart quantity. So we can actually delete this line, and the code will work the same way. If we save and try it out, it will still add a 2 and then save it back in cart quantity. Let's scroll up and practice by using this shortcut for cart quantity plus 1. So instead of this line, we can type cart quantity plus equals 1 and semicolon. So it turns out that in programming, plus equals 1 is so common that we have an even shorter shortcut for plus equals 1. And that shortcut is cart quantity plus plus and a semicolon. So this is the same thing as plus equals 1. And all three lines do the same thing. So we can remove these lines and the code will work the same because it's just a shortcut. If we save, so if we click add to cart, it will add 1 every time. So those are some shortcuts for reassigning variables. We also have these shortcuts for the other operators, like minus equals, multiply equals, divide equals, and minus minus. I'll leave some exercises for these other shortcuts at the end of this lesson. Next, we're going to learn some best practices for naming variables. So if we scroll down, notice that our variable cart quantity has 2 words in it, cart and quantity. We learned earlier that we can't have spaces in a variable name. So if we want to have multiple words, we have to combine them together, like this. Now you might be wondering why we wrote it this way, with a lowercase c and a capital Q. This is actually a naming convention called camel case. In camel case, we combine the words together and capitalize every word except the first word. So for cart quantity, we capitalize quantity, but we keep cart lowercase because it's the first word. Camel case is actually the standard naming convention for JavaScript. All of our variable names should use camel case. Now in programming, there are other naming conventions that exist. Another one is called Pascal case. Pascal case is the same as camel case, except we capitalize the first word. So for cart quantity, Pascal case would be capital cart and capital quantity. In JavaScript, there is one feature where we use Pascal case, which we'll learn later in this course. For everything else, we use camel case. Another naming convention is kebab case. Here, we keep the words lowercase and combine them with a dash, like cart-quantity. Kebab case doesn't work in JavaScript because the dash is already a minus symbol. However, we use kebab case in HTML and CSS, and also in our file names, as you can see here. And finally, we have snake case, where we keep the words lowercase and combine them with underscores. Snake case is used in other languages, but it's not really used in JavaScript. So those are the common naming conventions that we use in programming. Now, one more thing I want to note is that when we name our variables, try to pick a name that is not too short or too long. For example, instead of cart quantity, we could have named this variable C. But this name is too short. It's hard to understand what C means. We could also use a name like this: quantity of products in the cart. But this name is too long. It's hard to read this in the code. So try to have a balance between a name that is understandable but not too long, like cart quantity. The last thing we're going to learn in this lesson is there are 3 ways to create variables in JavaScript. Let's go back to our variables.html file, and we're going to learn those 3 ways. So the first way is to use let, which we already learned. The second way to create a variable is to use the word const. So at the bottom, we can type const space and then a variable name, like variable2, and make it equal to 3. So const creates a variable just like let, except we can't change its value later. This value stays constant. That's why it's called const. If we try to change its value, like variable2 equals 5, and then we save this and we open this file in the browser by right-clicking and then open with live server. And then open the console. So right-click, inspect, and then click the console. it will give us an error when we try to change this variable. So this doesn't work. Let's remove this line and save. So why would we ever use const instead of let? Well, const makes our code safer and easier to understand. When we create a variable with const, we know for sure that this variable will always contain 3. For let, however, if we create a variable, it's hard to know what value is inside this variable, because later on we can change this value in our code. So in order to keep our code safer, it's actually a best practice to use const by default, and only use let when we know that we need to change the variable. So here, it's actually best practice to use const to create this calculation variable, because we're not changing it later. Same thing for the result variable and the message variable. Now for variable 1, we have to use let because we're changing it later in this code. So that's const. It creates a variable that can't be changed later. Finally, the third way of creating a variable is to use another word, var. So at the bottom, we can type var space and then a variable name like variable 3 and make it equal to 3. So var creates a variable just like let, and this variable can be changed later. Var is actually the original way to create variables in JavaScript. Var means variable. However, var has some issues that we'll learn later in this course. And because of these issues, we don't use var in new JavaScript code. You might see var in older JavaScript code, so it's still useful to know. So those are 3 ways to create variables in JavaScript: let, const, and var. We use const by default, and if we have to change a variable, then use let. So one more thing we're going to learn is that we can use type of with variables. So remember that type of tells us what type a value is. For example, if we wrote console.log type of 3 and save, type of will tell us that 3 is a number. Well, we can actually use type of with a variable. So if we change this to variable 2 and save, type of will tell us the type of value inside the variable, which is a number. And that's what we see in the console. Now let's check the type of this variable, message. So message contains a string. And if we do console.log type of message and save, this will tell us that the value inside the message variable is a string. So we can use type of to check the type of value that is saved inside a variable. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned about variables, which are a way to save values and use them later. We learned how to reassign a variable. We created the cart quantity feature of the final project. We learned some shortcuts for reassigning a variable. We learned some naming conventions and best practices for variable names. And we learned 3 ways to create a variable: let, const, and var. Here's some exercises to help you practice using variables. In this lesson, we're going to learn two more features of JavaScript called Booleans and if statements. And we're going to use these features to build this rock, paper, scissors project. Let's start by creating a new HTML file for this lesson. We're going to go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files, and then click this icon to create a new file. We're going to name this file 06-booleans.html and press enter. Let's open variables.html, and we're going to copy all this code into our new file. Let's select the code using Ctrl-A on Windows or Command-A on Mac, and then right-click, copy, and in here, right-click and paste. Let's close this for now and prepare this file for this lesson. So we'll scroll to the top and change this to Booleans, and then remove all the JavaScript code, but keep the script element. Now let's save and open this file in Live Server by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. And we can close the previous tabs as well as the previous code for now. We'll start by learning what are Booleans. So far in this course, we learned two types of values in JavaScript, numbers and strings. Booleans are another type of value in JavaScript. But Booleans are special because there are only two Boolean values, true and false. Let's click in the script element and type true. Press enter and type false. So these are the only two Boolean values that exist, true and false. So what's the purpose of Boolean values? A Boolean value represents whether something is true or false. For example, in JavaScript, we can compare two numbers. Let's create some new lines and type the code 3 less than 5. So this code checks whether the number 3 is less than 5. And of course, this is true. So if we console.log this code, console.log, and save, and then go to our website and open the console, right-click, inspect, and console, it will show us that the result of this code is the Boolean value true. Let's try another example. Let's delete this less than symbol and replace it with a greater than symbol. So now this code checks whether 3 is greater than 5. And we know that 3 is not greater than 5. So if we save, the computer will tell us that the result of this comparison is the Boolean value false. So as you can see, a Boolean value represents whether something is true or false. Now let's learn the syntax rules for Booleans. To create a Boolean, we just type true or false. Note that we don't surround these with quotes like this. If we surround them with quotes, this is now a string, not a Boolean. We can use type of to check this. So at the front, we can type console.log type of true. If we save, this will tell us that this is a string. Now, if we remove the quotes and save, this will tell us that this is now a Boolean. So when creating a Boolean, don't put quotes around true or false. Let's save. Now, one way to create a Boolean is to compare two numbers. For example, 3 greater than 5. So this greater than symbol is called a comparison operator. And there are many other comparison operators we can use. We saw less than earlier, and we also have greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, triple equals, which checks if two values are equal to each other, and exclamation double equals, which checks if two values are not equal to each other. Now, JavaScript is a little special because it has two ways to check if two values are equal: triple equals and double equals. The difference is that double equals tries to convert both values into the same type. For example, in our code, let's create some new lines and console.log, and let's check if the number 5 is equal to the string 5.00. If we save, it will tell us that these two values are equal to each other, even though one of them is a number and the other is a string. And that's because the double equals converts both values into the same type. So it converts both of these into the number 5 and then compares them. So that's why they are equal. However, this is not a good idea because this value is a number and this value is a string. It's a piece of text. So they shouldn't really be equal to each other. That's why in JavaScript, we always use the triple equals to check if two values are the same, so that we avoid the conversion behavior of double equals. So if we save, now it will tell us that these two values are not equal to each other, because one value is a number and the other value is a string. So this rule also applies to not equal to. In JavaScript, we always use exclamation double equals instead of exclamation equals to avoid the conversion behavior. All right, so those are comparison operators. In the order of operations, comparison operators have a lower priority than math. So if we did something like 5 and then minus 5, this would calculate 5 minus 5 first, which is 0, and then compare the two numbers. So 3 is now greater than 0. So if we save, the first comparison will now be true. So comparison operators have a lower priority than math operators. Now that we know what Boolean values are, we're going to combine them with a really useful feature called if statements. An if statement lets us write multiple groups of code and then decide which code to run. Let's do an example and create our first if statement. We're going to go to the bottom and create some new lines and type if, and open bracket, close bracket, and open curly bracket, closed curly bracket. Between these round brackets, we're going to put a Boolean value like true. And in between the curly brackets, we're going to put some code to run. For example, console.log hello. So the way that an if statement works is that if this Boolean value is true, then we're going to run the code in the curly brackets. If this Boolean value is false, then we're not going to run the code. If we save, the value between the brackets is true, so we're going to run this code and display hello. Now if we change this to false and save, it will not run this code. So an if statement lets us decide whether or not to run some code based on this Boolean value. Now if statements have another useful feature called else. Let's go to the end of this if statement and type else, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then inside these curly brackets, we're going to put some different code like console.log else. The way else works is if this Boolean value is true, the computer will run this code. Otherwise, we will run the code inside else. Let's give it a try. We'll change this Boolean value to true and save. And because it is true, it will run this code and display hello. Now, if this Boolean value is false and save, because it is false, it will not run this code, and it will run the code inside else and display else. So using if and else, we can write two groups of code and then decide which code to run. Now let's do a practical example. We're going to write some code to check if someone is old enough to drive. Let's go to the bottom and create some new lines. And we're going to type if, brackets, and curly brackets. And inside here, we're going to compare two numbers. The first number is a person's age. Let's pretend we have a person who is 30 years old. So we're going to type 30. Then we're going to check if this age is greater than or equal to the legal driving age. Let's pretend the legal driving age is 16. Notice that between the brackets, we don't have to just put a Boolean value. We can put any code that results in a Boolean value. So this comparison results in the Boolean value true. That means the computer will run the code between the curly brackets. So in here, let's type console.log you can drive. Now, if this is not true, let's run some different code. At the bottom, we'll type else and curly brackets, and then inside these brackets, we'll type console.log you cannot drive. Now let's save, and it will tell me that this person who is 30 years old can drive. If we go back and change this to a person that is 15 years old and save, this comparison will result in false. So it will display you cannot drive. So that's how we use if statements. We can write multiple groups of code for different situations and then decide which code to run. Now let's learn the syntax rules for if statements. To create an if statement, we type if, and then round brackets with a Boolean value inside. This is called the condition. If this condition is true, we will run the code inside the curly brackets. We can also add an else statement. This code will run if the condition is false. The else statement is optional. We don't have to have one. So these curly brackets and the code inside, these are called branches because it's like a tree branch. The code is splitting off into two directions, and we either run this code or we run this code. One more thing to know is in a branch, if we only have one line of code, the curly brackets are actually optional. So we can delete these and the code will still work. However, if we have more than one line of code in this branch, for example, if we add another line, console.log congrats, now this branch has two lines of code, so the curly brackets are mandatory. So we have to add them back. Now we're going to learn another feature of if statements, which is we can have more than one condition. For example, we're going to go to the end of this if branch and type else if, and then brackets and curly brackets. Else if lets us add another branch to our if statement. Between these round brackets, we can add another condition. For example, if a person is almost old enough to drive, let's display a different message. So inside this condition, let's check if this person's age, which is 15, is greater than or equal to 14. So we're checking if they are almost old enough to drive. And now inside the curly brackets, we're going to display a different message. Console.log almost there. So the way this works is that the if statement checks the conditions one by one. First, it checks if this is true. If it is, it will run this branch. Then it checks if this is true. If it is, it will run this branch. And if none of the conditions are true, it will run the else branch. So here, this condition is false, so we're not going to run this code. But now the second condition is true, so we're going to run this code. If we save, we display almost there in the console. So using else if branches, we can add as many conditions as we want to an if statement. The next thing we're going to learn is that we can combine if statements with variables from the previous lesson. For example, here we wrote the person's age 2 times. So we can actually save this age in a variable and then reuse that value. So above the if statement, let's create a variable using const, and let's name this variable age, and we'll make it equal to 15. Remember, the best practice for creating a variable is to use const by default, and only use let if we're going to change this value later. And now that we saved this number in a variable, we can use the variable inside the if statement. So we'll replace 15 with age, and here as well with age. So this will take whatever value is inside the variable and substitute it into the code. If we save, the if statement works the same way as before, and we run this line. Okay, now we're ready to use booleans and if statements to do a project. We're going to build a rock, paper, scissors game. First, let's take a look at the project. We're going to go to our browser, and at the top, create a new tab, and we're going to type here super simple.dev/projects/booleans and press enter. Here we can see a simple version of a rock, paper, scissors game, and if we click this link, it will take us to the final version of this game. So in this game, we can pick a move, and then the computer will pick a random move, and it will show us the result. And we also have a score of how many times we won, lost, and tied. So we're going to build this as we go through the course. But for now, let's go back, and we're going to start by building this simple version of the game. So how this simple version works is we click one of these buttons to pick a move. So let's pick rock. Then the computer will randomly pick a move. In this case, it's paper, but for you, it might be different. And it will compare the two moves and display the results in this pop-up. So the rules of rock, paper, scissors are rock beats scissors, paper beats rock, and scissors beats paper. Let's press OK, and we'll get started on this project. First, we'll create a new HTML file just for this project. Let's go to our code editor and click here and create a new file. And we're going to name this file 06-rock-paper-scissors.html and press enter. Next, let's copy all the code from booleans.html into this new file. So we'll open this again, and then Control A or Command A to select all the code, and then right-click, copy, and in here, right-click and paste. Let's close this and prepare this file. So we'll change this to rock, paper, scissors, and remove all of the JavaScript code that we had before. Finally, let's save and open this file in the browser by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. Let's take a look at the project again. So we're going to start by creating the text first, because this text is in the final version of the project. So in our HTML, we're going to create a paragraph element for this text. So less than p greater than, and the closing tag less than /p greater than. Inside our paragraph, we're going to have the text rock paper, scissors. Next, let's create the buttons. So we'll go to our HTML and create a button. And inside this first button, we'll have the text rock. Let's create another button. This one will be paper. And we'll create the last button. This one will be scissors. Now let's save and check our new tab. And now we created all the elements that we need. Next, let's make these elements interactive with JavaScript. So when writing JavaScript, a good strategy is to think about what steps we need to do and then convert those steps into code. So here, when we click a button, the first step is the computer will randomly select a move, and then we're going to compare the moves to get the result. And finally, we'll display the result in a pop-up. By the way, this is called an algorithm. An algorithm is a set of steps to complete a task or to solve a problem. Now that we know what steps we need to do, we're going to convert these steps or this algorithm into code. First, we're going to run some JavaScript when we click these buttons. So let's use the onClick attribute again. We'll go to the opening tag of the button and type onClick equals double quotes. And then inside these double quotes, we can add our JavaScript. So now we have to figure out how to randomly select a move for the computer. To do this, we need to learn a new piece of JavaScript code. So here, we're going to type capital M math.random, open bracket, close bracket. Math.random generates a random number between 0 and 1. So if we console.log this, console.log, and save, and click this button, and then check in our console by right-clicking, inspect, and the console, it will display a random number between 0 and 1. If we click this button again, it will generate a different random number. So every time we run math.random, it generates a different random number between 0 and 1. Now, to be more precise, it actually generates a number greater than equal to 0 and less than 1. Now let's save this random number in a variable so we can use it later. So we'll replace the console.log with const and then a variable name. Let's just name it random capital N number and then equals. So we saved this random number inside this variable. Next, we need a way to convert this random number into a move like rock, paper, or scissors. To do this, let's imagine the space between 0 and 1, and then divide the space into 3 equal parts. Each part represents a move. If we generate a random number and it's between 0 and 1/3, the move will be rock. If it's between 1/3 and 2/3, the move will be paper. And if it's between 2/3 and 1, the move will be scissors. This is how we can convert the random number into a move, and this will give the computer an equal chance of picking rock, paper, or scissors. Now let's convert these steps into code, and an if statement is the perfect solution for this. This already looks like an if statement. So in our onClick attribute, let's add some new lines and type if, brackets, and curly brackets. For this first condition, we're going to check if the random number is between 0 and 1/3. So let's check if random number is greater than or equal to 0. But in this case, we also need to check that random number is less than 1/3, because we're checking if the number is between 0 and 1/3. But how do we do this? How do we check that two comparisons are both true? To do this, we're going to learn another type of operator in JavaScript called logical operators. Logical operators let us combine Boolean values, which is what we need to do here. Let's go back into booleans.html, and we're going to learn logical operators. So first, let's open the tab for this file, and we're going to comment out all the previous code so our console doesn't get too messy. /*, and then at the bottom, */. Now let's create some new lines. And the first logical operator we're going to learn is called the AND operator. Let's type console.log a Boolean value true and another Boolean value true. So this is the AND operator, and it checks if two Boolean values are both true. So it checks if the left side is true and the right side is true. That's why it's called the AND operator. So here, the left side is true and the right side is also true. So the AND operator will result in true. If we save, this displays true. Now, if one of these sides is false, for example, if we change this to false, now let's check, is the left side and the right side both true? In this case, no. So AND will now result in false. If we save, it now displays false. So that's the logical AND operator. It checks if the left side is true and the right side is also true. So this is exactly what we need for our project. For example, let's create a new line and type console.log. And let's say that we generated a random number like 0.2. And we want to check if it's between 0 and 1/3. So we can do 0.2 is greater than or equal to 0. And we're also going to check if 0.2 is less than 1/3. So we're using the logical AND operator to check if the left side is true and the right side is also true. So in this example, both sides are true. 0.2 is between 0 and 1/3. So if we save, this whole thing will display true. Now in the order of operations, logical operators like AND have a lower priority than math and comparisons. So in this example, it will calculate the math first, and then it will calculate the comparison on the left, and then the comparison on the right, and then at the end, the AND operator checks if both sides result in true. Now let's use the AND operator in our project. Let's go back to the file for our project, and then inside this first condition, we're going to check if the random number is greater than or equal to 0, and at the same time, is the random number less than 1/3. So this is how we check if a number is between 0 and 1/3. In this case, the computer will pick rock. So between the curly brackets, let's just type console.log rock. Let's get some practice and create the other two branches for picking paper and scissors. Feel free to pause this video if you want to try it yourself first. So here, we're going to type else if to add another branch, and then brackets and curly brackets. And in this condition, we're going to check if random number is greater than or equal to 1/3 and random number is less than 2/3. So if this random number is between 1/3 third and 2/3. Inside here, we're going to console.log paper. And finally, let's create another branch using else if random number greater than or equal to 2/3 and random number less than 1. And console.log scissors. If we save and then go back to our rock, paper, scissors tab and then click the rock button a few times, it will pick some random moves for the computer. So that's how we generate the computer's move. One thing I want to point out is that I use the less than comparison instead of less than or equal to. I just did this so that the comparisons don't overlap. Before we continue in the project, we're going to learn 2 other logical operators we can use. Let's go back to booleans.html, and let's also open the tab for this file. The next logical operator is called the OR operator. For example, let's type some new lines and type console.log true or false. So this is the logical OR operator. It checks if at least one side is true. So it checks if the left side is true or the right side is true. That's why it's called the OR operator. So here, one of these sides is true, so the OR operator will result in true. If we save, this displays true. If both sides are true, it will also result in true, because at least one side is true. The last logical operator we're going to learn is called the NOT operator. For example, let's create a new line and type console.log exclamation true. So the exclamation is called the NOT operator. The NOT operator only uses one Boolean value, and it flips it into the opposite value. So if this value is true, the NOT operator will flip it into false. So if we save, this will result in false. Now, if you think about it, if we say that something is not true, that's the same thing as saying that it is false. So that's why this is called the NOT operator. Now, if we change the value to false, again, the NOT operator will flip this into true. So if we save, this will now result in true. So those are the logical OR and NOT operators. We don't need to use these in our project right now, but I'll leave some exercises for these at the end of this lesson. Now let's go back and continue the project. Let's open the code and open the tab. The next step is to compare the computer's move to our move, which is rock. So first, let's save the computer's move in a variable so we can compare it later. So instead of console.log, we're going to create a variable with const computer capital M move and make it equal to the string rock. And we'll do the same thing here. Const computer move equals paper. And here, const computer move equals scissors. And now at the bottom, let's console.log the computer move variable to make sure that it worked. If we save and then click our rock button, unfortunately, it gives us an error telling us that computer move is not defined, even though we created it right here. So what is happening here? If statements have a special feature. They create something called a scope. A scope limits where a variable exists. Basically, whenever we have these curly brackets like this, any variable we create inside the curly brackets will only exist inside the curly brackets. And we can't use these variables outside the curly brackets.
Oh, hi.
So this is called
mic
a
was
scope.
off.
Scopes are a feature of many programming languages, and they help us avoid naming conflicts.
How can I say that? For the moment, he is going all well. It's just the beginning. Like everything is good for the moment. Okay, with I don't know. Okay, wait, adjust my. I'll just do some configuration. I don't. I think this volume is max, but I'll just do something. Okay. Okay. Oh my god. Okay, I don't know why, but is this alright now or the volume is still low? Okay, I'll just yeah, screen. It's just that I don't know why the mic of my thanks, but is the volume alright too low?
For example, if I create a variable here called random number equals 0.5, and this didn't create a scope, so if I delete these curly brackets, this variable name will now conflict with the variable name up here, because we can't have two variables with the same name. So you can imagine that if we didn't have scope, and we had hundreds or even thousands of lines of code, we would quickly start to run out of variable names. So by creating a new scope here,
I don't know if my volume is alright now, because like I'm using the mic of my earphones, and oh, I also have a mic here, but I don't really want to like too much move. That's why, but I hope the volume is okay right now.
all the variable names inside the scope only exist between the curly brackets, and it won't affect anything outside in the code. So scopes help us avoid naming conflicts. Okay, so I'll delete this example, and we'll learn how to access this variable outside of this scope. So to access this variable outside of the if statement, we have to create this variable outside of the if statement. So above here, we can create this variable, const computer move. And let's just make it equal to the empty string for now. So this variable was not created inside any curly brackets, so it's accessible from all of this code inside the onClick attribute, including inside the if statement. And then inside the if statement, instead of creating a new variable, we're just going to save the move inside this variable up here, because we can access this variable anywhere else in the code. So instead of using const, we're just going to reassign computer move. And we're going to remove it here as well, and here as well. And remember, when we reassign a variable, we have to switch from const to let. And now if we save and then click the rock button, we're able to console.log computer move, because computer move is no longer inside this scope. It's up here, so we can access it in this line of code. So that's how scope works. Any variable that we create inside curly brackets will only exist inside the curly brackets. So remember, in the previous lesson, we learned a third way of creating variables called var. The issue with var is that it doesn't really follow the rules of scope. For example, here, if we create a variable with var, like var and random number equals 0.5, this variable will conflict with the variable up here with the same name, even though it's inside a scope. So that's why we don't use var anymore, and we just use const and let, because var doesn't really follow the rules of scope. So we can remove this for now and move on to the next step. So we generated a random move for the computer. Now we have to compare our move, which is rock, to the computer's move to get the result and see who wins. To do that, we'll use another if statement. So at the bottom here, let's type if, and then brackets and curly brackets. And then inside this condition, let's check if the computer move is equal to rock. So remember, in JavaScript, we always use triple equals instead of double equals to avoid the conversion behavior. And now if the computer's move is rock and our move is rock, then inside the curly brackets, the result is going to be a tie. And let's save this string in a variable so we can use it later. Again, we have the same situation as before. We don't want to create the variable inside here, because then it only exists in this scope between the curly brackets. Instead, we're going to create the variable above, outside the if statement. So we'll use let to create this variable, because we're going to reassign it in the if statement. Let's name this variable result and just make it equal to the empty string at the top. And then in the if statement, we'll save the result into this variable. So result equals tie. Now let's create the other branches of this if statement. So here we'll add else if, brackets and curly brackets, and we'll check if the computer move is equal to paper this time. If the computer move is paper and we picked rock, then we lose. So the result is equal to you lose. And finally, we'll add add another else if brackets and curly brackets, and we'll check if the computer move is equal to scissors. And if the computer picked scissors and we pick rock, the result is that you win. So that's how we compare our move to the computer's random move using an if statement. The last step is to display this result in the pop-up. So at the bottom, let's create a pop-up using alert, open bracket, close bracket, and let's go back to super simple dev to see the message in the pop-up. So we'll click this, and in the pop-up, it shows our move, the computer's move, and then the result. So we can actually just copy this, right-click, copy, and then in here, right-click and paste. So obviously, the computer is not going to pick this move every time, and this is not going to be the same result every time. Instead, we want to insert computer move into here, and we want to insert result into here. So because we want to insert values, we're going to turn this into a template string using backticks. And now instead of paper, we're going to insert a value using $ and curly brackets, and we're going to insert the variable computer move. And instead of this text every time, we're going to insert the variable result. And now if we save, and we can click OK to close this and go back to our tab and click the rock button, we're going to pick rock. The computer will pick a random move and it will show us the result in a pop-up. So that's how we create this simple version of rock, paper, scissors. In our code, we did things step by step. First, we generated a random number. We converted it into a move for the computer. And then we compared our move to the computer move, and we displayed the result in a pop-up. So as you can see, when we're writing JavaScript, we first figure out what steps we need to do. This is called an algorithm. And then we convert these steps, or this algorithm, into code. So now we can actually remove this console.log because we don't need it anymore. And the last step is to make the other buttons here interactive. So feel free to pause this video if you want to try it yourself first. For the paper button, let's add some new lines to make it a little easier to read. And again, we'll add the onClick attribute. And then inside here, we can actually make a copy of all the JavaScript we wrote. So we can select all of this and then right-click, copy, and then in here, right-click and paste. If the formatting doesn't look right, we can select all of these lines and press Tab to add indents until the formatting looks good. The one thing we have to change here is that now we picked paper, so the result is going to be different. If the computer picks rock and we pick paper, that means you win. If the computer picks paper, now it means that we tie. And if the computer picks scissors, that means you lose. And here we'll also change you pick rock to paper. And that's it. The last step is to make the scissors button interactive. So again, on click equals double quotes, and then we'll make a copy of the code. So I already have it, so just right click and paste. And then again, select the code that we need to fix the formatting for and press Tab. And here we pick scissors. So if the computer picks rock, then the result is you lose. If the computer picks paper, the result is you win. And if the computer also picks scissors, the result is a tie. And we'll change you picked rock to scissors. Now if we save and try out our game, if we click rock, we're going to pick rock, computer picks a random move, and it will show us the result here. Let's press OK and try paper. This also works correctly. Let's press OK and click scissors. And this also works correctly. And that's it. We just finished creating a simple version of this rock, paper, scissors game. In the rest of this lesson, we're going to learn more details about booleans and if statements. Let's go back to booleans.html and open the tab for this file. And let's comment out the previous code using /* and */ and create some new lines. The next thing we're going to learn is called truthy and falsy values. So if statements don't just work with Boolean values like true and false. They actually work with any type of value, including numbers and strings. For example, let's type if, brackets and curly brackets, and inside this condition, instead of putting a Boolean value, we're going to put a number like 5. And then inside the curly brackets, let's console.log the string truthy. If we save, the number 5 behaves just like true. It causes the if statement to run this code. So we call this value a truthy value because it behaves just like true. Now let's change this value to a different number, 0. If we save, the number 0 behaves just like false. It causes the if statement to not run this code. We call this value 0 a falsy value because it behaves just like false. So how do we know if a value is truthy or falsy? In JavaScript, the list of falsy values are false, the number 0, the empty string, nan, undefined, and null. Any value that is not on this list is a truthy value. So why do we use truthy and falsy values? value. So why do we use truthy and falsy values? One way we use them is like a shortcut in our code. For example, let's create a variable at the bottom using const, and let's call it cart quantity and make it equal to 5. Next, let's create an if statement. If, brackets, and curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, let's type console.log the string cart has products. Now let's say that we only want to display this message if our cart has products. Usually, inside this condition, we would check if cart quantity is greater than 0. But now, instead of doing this comparison, we can actually just type cart quantity, and it will behave the same way. If the cart quantity is not 0, they will both behave like true. If the cart quantity is 0, they will both behave like false. So here, the cart quantity is 5, which is a truthy value. If we save, this causes the if statement to run this code. As you can see, instead of doing comparisons, we can use truthy and falsy values as shortcuts. Truthy and falsy values also work with logical operators. For example, if we console.log the not operator and the number 0, 0 is a falsy value. It behaves just like false, so the not operator will flip it into true. If we save, this will display true. Now that we understand truthy and falsy values, let's go over the list of falsy values, because there are some that we haven't learned yet. We already learned false, 0, and the empty string. The next falsy value is nan, which means not a number. We get nan if we do some invalid math. For example, at the bottom, let's type console.log the string text divided by the number 5. So obviously, this is not valid math. If we save, JavaScript will tell us that the result of this calculation is not a number, or nan. The next falsy value is undefined. Undefined represents that something doesn't have a value. For example, at the bottom, if we create a variable with let variable1 and we don't give it a value, and then we console.log this variable, and we save, it will show us that variable 1 contains the value undefined. So undefined represents that this variable doesn't have a value. One thing to note with undefined is that we can only use this syntax with let. We can't use it with const. If we really want to use this with const, we have to type out equals undefined directly. The last falsy value is null. We'll need some extra knowledge to understand null, so we'll learn about null later in this course. The last thing we're going to learn in this lesson are some shortcuts for if statements, called the ternary operator, the guard operator, and the default operator. First, let's comment out this code so our console doesn't get too messy. /*, and then at the bottom, */. And let's scroll down, and we'll start by learning the ternary operator. We're going to type a Boolean value like true, and question mark, another value, for example, the string truthy, and then colon, and another value, like the string falsy. So this is the ternary operator. This is similar to an if-else statement. The first value is like the condition. If it's truthy, the result of this code is a value after the question mark. If the first value is falsy, The result of this code is the value after the colon. So you can think of the question mark as the if branch and the colon as the else branch. This is sort of like a shortcut for an if statement like this. Now, an advantage of the ternary operator over an if statement is that we can save a ternary operator in a variable. So at the front, we can do const result equals. And now if we console.log the result and save, the first value is true. So the value after the question mark gets saved in the variable. As always, we can use truthy and falsy values instead of just true and false. So here, if we change the first value to a falsy value like 0, this will cause the value after the colon to get saved inside the variable. If we save, that's exactly what happens. So this is the ternary operator. It's sort of a shortcut for an if-else statement like this. The next shortcut is called the guard operator. Earlier in this lesson, we learned the AND operator, which checks if two sides are both truthy. The AND operator has a special feature. Let's say we have an AND operator and the left side is false. In this situation, we already know it's impossible for both sides to be truthy, so we don't even need to check the right side. So the AND operator actually stops early and doesn't even run the code on the right. This is called a short circuit evaluation. For example, let's go into our code and create some new lines, and we'll type false and console.log hello. If we save, the left side is falsy, so the AND operator stops early or short circuits, and it doesn't even run the code on the right. So as you can see, we can use the value on the left to block or guard the code on the right. So when we use the AND operator like this, we call it the guard operator. This is sort of like a shortcut for an if statement like this. And just like the ternary operator, we can save the guard operator in a variable. For example, let's create a variable const message and make it equal to false and the string hello. If the first value is falsy, the guard operator will stop early, and the result will be the first value. If we console.log this message and save, the value false will be saved inside this variable. Now let's change this value to a truthy value, like the number 5. Now it will not stop early, and it will give us the second value as the result. If we save, the string hello is now saved inside this variable. This is sort of like a shortcut for an if statement like this. So don't worry if it's a bit confusing. All of these are just shortcuts for an if statement. They're sort of like an if statement that we can write on a single line. The last shortcut is called the default operator, which is similar to the guard operator but uses OR. Earlier in this lesson, we learned the OR operator, which checks if at least one side is truthy. Let's imagine we have an OR operator and the left side is true. In this situation, we already know the result of the OR operator because the left side is already truthy. We don't even need to check the right side. So the OR operator also stops early or short circuits if the first value is truthy. For example, let's create some new lines, and let's say that in our final Amazon project, we can choose a currency to pay for our order. Let's create a variable with const currency and make it equal to the string EUR, or euros. Now let's say that choosing a currency is optional. If we don't choose a currency, we'll use a default value of USD, or United States dollars. To create a default value, we can go to the end and type or the string USD. So here, the left side is truthy. So the OR operator will stop early, and it will result in the value on the left. If we console.log the currency and save, it will display euros. Now let's say that we didn't choose a currency because it's optional. So let's go here, and we're going to change this currency to undefined. Now the left side is falsy, so the OR operator does not short circuit. It will continue, and the result will be the value on the right. If we save, now the string USD is saved inside currency. As you can see, we can use the OR operator to set a default value. So when we use the OR operator like this, we call it the default operator. The default operator is sort of a shortcut for an if statement like this. So don't worry, remember that everything that we learned in this last section are basically some shortcuts for if statements. We don't have to use them, but they can save us some typing. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned about Booleans and if statements. Boolean values represent whether something is true or false. We learned how to use if statements to make decisions in our code. We learned how to use comparison and logical operators. We learned about algorithms and created a simple version of rock, paper, scissors. We learned about truthy and falsy values. And we learned some shortcuts for if statements: the ternary operator, the guard operator, and the default operator. Here's some exercises to help you practice Booleans and if statements.
je pense que je vais m'arrêter là. Alors, je sais pas trop, mais ouais, c'est ça. Là, je vais m'arrêter là. Maintenant, on va se dire dans quelques heures, vu que j'ai un peu du taf à faire. Dans... Ouais, alors c'était quand même cool. Donc, c'est intéressant. C'est déjà trouvé tout pour un autre truc.